Next we will look at the concept of interfaces. Interfaces, we said, are purely abstract classes. It means to say that you cannot have any definition in an interface. To define an interface, you use the keyword interface followed by the interface name. So what can you define, or what can you write in an interface? An interface can consist of methods which are of type public and abstract only, and variables which are of type public, static, final types. These are the only two types of contents that you can have in an interface. Even if you don't mention these modifiers for the methods and variables respectively, by default they are treated, the methods are treated as public abstract, the variables are treated as public static final. So for an interface, when you define a variable in an interface, let's say int I, since it is public static final, you must then and there itself assign a value. Whereas in a class, let it be an abstract class or a defined class, if you have a static final variable, you can give the value for that final variable in the constructor, which you cannot do out here because there is no constructor available for an interface. If I have a constructor for an interface, then I have some definition in an interface. I cannot have definitions in an interface because they are supposed to be purely abstract contents. Let's say in interface I1, we declare methods called add, mod, and del. And we define an interface I2, disp, interface I3, we will define a method called query, an interface can be derived from multiple interfaces. So let's say I3 can extend from both I1, I2. Interfaces can multiply inherit other interfaces because they are completely abstract, they are not defined. So you're not actually going to use the methods coming from these two interfaces out here in any way. So it's safe to use multiple inheritance for interfaces, but multiple inheritance for classes is not possible. A class cannot inherit multiple classes. A class can inherit from an interface by implementing the interface. A class implementing an interface must implement all the methods of the interface, because remember, all the methods of an interface are abstract. Even if I leave out one method from being defined in a interface into a class, then the class must be declared as abstract, because the class holds an abstract method. So therefore we need to define the add method, the mod method, and the del method. Apart from these, you can have other functions in this particular class. Now if I were to compile this class, I would get an error. What is the error? Now if you look at this interface here, you have defined it as void add mod and del, and the same way you try to define here in class A. But we said by default, without you mentioning the modifiers, the methods are public abstract, and when you're implementing the methods of the interface, you're implementing the methods as default or package specified, because you never mentioned public here. So when you don't mention the access specifier, it's taken as default. So the error message while compiling is that you get saying you're trying to restrict the access. You can never override or implement a method from the parent to child by restricting the access, but you can always expand upon the access. Suppose if I have a protected method, I can make it public by expanding on the scope, but you can never restrict the scope. So we must explicitly say public here. Now let's say I have int I is equal to 10 out here. I can access the variable I anywhere in this particular class. Let's say I just want to display the value of I. Now where is the variable I out here in this class? This class does not define any variable I. So this class implements I1, and I1 has int I, and that's the I value that you are displaying here. Let's assume now I have int I here. Now when I say SOP of I, it's this particular I that I'm referring to, and no longer the I of the interface I1. If at all I want to access this interface variable I, then I must explicitly say I1.I out here. A class can implement any number of interfaces just with a comma separator. All those interfaces that a class implements, the class must implement all the methods of all the interfaces out here. So which means to say, I need to have a method void disp here, public void disp. Now let's say I don't have this int I, and here therefore I just say I here. Now I'm accessing the I of I1. But let's assume I have int I is equal to 20 here in I2, and this class happens to be implementing I1 and I2. Now which I am I talking about here? Because I got these two I's which I have inherited from the interface.